You wanted to come out with
Actually, they,
tomorrow or Wednesday?
Actually, Wednesday, because I have a 3-hour class.
I started working on it, so I'm pretty far into it, but there are a few things that are throwing me off. But you're good at that.
A little bit.
Yeah.
They call the building.
My wife hates them. She hates any guy that's got longer hair and better hair than she's got. I want to welcome you guys to our first Hilton Distinguished Entrepreneur Lecture Series presentation of the year. It's been a wonderful program now where we've completed 5 years and we've had absolutely powerful, wonderful people. The idea of the program is to show you guys that entrepreneurs come in all sizes and shapes. It doesn't matter. There's no stereotype. You can't say they all look like this, they're all this way, they all go that direction. And this guy tonight is, to me, a really wonderful example of a social entrepreneur. An entrepreneur who does something good for society, who causes things to happen in the world by using his entrepreneurial talents, his ability to create a business, his ability to make something happen. I don't think it's on, Gary.
It is on. It's just not running on battery.
There is a plug.
Yeah, I know. I gotta plug it back in.
We're having a little discussion on the side. Sorry about that.
Sorry about that. Where the hell are you close?
This fellow, Don Schoendorfer, had a PhD in mechanical engineering, and we in business do occasionally talk to the engineering types and all that. But and you know what's beautiful in the world now? Engineering and so much in his heart that he had to take action and cause something good to happen in the world. And I've been where he originally had his motivation for this, to Morocco, where my wife and I saw the same things he saw, and it deeply moved us, the suffering of people over there. And it's incredible. I'm going to ask Don Schoendorfer to come on up for a second here before we let him talk. Hilton Distinguished Entrepreneur Award, which is kind of free. He's got his picture in there. That isn't bad at all. Shows him with his wheelchair. And it says the Conrad Hilton Distinguished Entrepreneur Award, celebrating entrepreneurial excellence, exceptional achievement, powerful leadership, and social impact. Presented to Don Schoendorfer, social entrepreneur, humanitarian. That's a hell of a title to have after your name, humanitarian. Do you understand what that means? You've done something for the world that counts. And this man is one, and I'm awful proud to present him to you. And I'm not going to read the rest because he's going to tell you all that right now. So I'm going to just put this up here. If later you guys want to, you can touch it, but well. I'll put it right up here and then let him go. Okay? I'm sorry, this normally would sit up higher, but for some reason our legs aren't working, so you can see it down there. Have at it.
Okay. Do I need a microphone? Can you hear me all right?
You're great.
Okay.
Is he?
Yeah.
Because I'd rather not use it out
By the way, I have to tell you, those guys way up there, those are my back row bombers.
All right.
My A students are right up here, you see.
Can they throw tomatoes from that far?
They don't throw tomatoes from that far, but I throw microphones from that far. Okay.
Professor Kiesner said I could take my coat off after I was introduced, so. Okay. I wanted to paint a picture for you because it's something that you may not be familiar with here in the United States. I certainly wasn't. Take you back in time when you're like 5 years old, and you're in India. You're born in India. Your family is poor. Your father's an agricultural worker. Your mother hasn't a job. She takes care of your brothers and sisters. Your father makes $2 a day, but he pays $1 a day for room and board, and that dollar feeds the family of maybe 6 people, and maybe a grandmother and an aunt, and maybe some other neighbors when their luck is down. And there's no social medicine. You're born at home. Your neighbors helped your mother deliver you. And you're about 5 years old, and suddenly you start to have some aches and pains in your legs, and you don't know why. And a little harder to move. There's no doctors to talk to. You just live with it. It gets worse. And you have this thing they call the joint disease, which is polio, but they don't have the words for it. And you gradually lose your muscles in your legs atrophy. They've become, because you can't use them, because your brain no longer talks to your legs. you walk with a limp. Pretty soon you walk very slowly. Pretty soon you can't walk at all. Pretty soon you have to crawl or be carried. And that's your future. You're living basically on the ground. You can hear your friends playing. You can hear life go by beside you, but you're really not involved in it because you're at home. You're on the ground. You have to crawl if you want to move, or you have to wait for somebody to come and help you. When you have to go to the bathroom, you have to yell out for somebody to carry you. You eat on the floor with a bowl. You sleep on a mat. Imagine how terrified you are when a rat comes by, or a snake, and you can't move. You've got to hope that rat wants to go someplace else because you have to drag yourself away. And that's kind of the picture I wanted you to paint, these people that live on the ground. If I were to crawl on the ground here in the United States, they'd arrest me for creating a disturbance. But 130 million people or so live just like I told you. I'd like to show you a video about that now, and then we'll continue this discussion.
Years ago in Morocco, I witnessed a crippled individual crawling across the dirt road. I often dreamed of how I could help that poor person. During the past few years, God has shown me a path.
Throughout the world, the disabled community lives in back rooms, away from the eyes of the able-bodied population. Millions of victims of disease, accidents, war, landmines, and other causes have lost their mobility. In many cases, they're members of loving families, but families who are simply too poor to afford the luxury of a wheelchair. In these third world countries, if you can't walk by yourself, you must crawl or be carried, living a life of confinement on the floor, in a bed or a back room. If you're a working adult who becomes disabled, you may lose your livelihood and jeopardize the lives of your family. Many charitable organizations ship either donated used wheelchairs or conventional designed new wheelchairs to poor countries. This is a very costly and inefficient process. To date, less than 100,000 wheelchairs were placed through much effort.
And then I look into statistics on the need of wheelchairs for handicapped people around the world from organizations such as the UN and World Health Organization. And I found that there is a need for over 100 million wheelchairs. There are over 100 million people who have lost the ability to walk and either crawl, live on the ground, or somehow are supported by their loved ones and are basically doomed to live that way for the rest of their lives. 100 million people.
Don is trained as a mechanical engineer and has spent the past 25 years developing blood separators, diagnostic technologies, and various biomedical products that help preserve the health of citizens in prosperous countries like the United States. But Don now feels it's time to turn his attention and the gifts God has blessed him with toward one of the most basic needs of his fellow man, mobility.
It's simple, but we can afford to give them away. And when you visit a slum, when you visit people that are handicapped in developing countries, and you see what they don't have and what they could use to establish mobility, and you walk away with an entirely different definition of a wheelchair, they want to get up off the ground. They want to get up off the dirt and the dampness and away from where the snakes crawl and the rats crawl. They want to be able to get out of the way of people. And so a wheelchair, all it needs is a chair with wheels. It's quite appropriate for their needs.
From the initial introduction of our first wheelchair in Chennai, India, the free wheelchair mission seemed to take on a life of its own. Each day opened another door to opportunity and improvement. The second mission to Luanda, Angola proved even more valuable and dramatically demonstrated the overwhelming need for wheelchairs.
The problem here is that we don't have enough wheelchairs. We have so many people want this chair, it's very difficult for us to decide who to give this chairs to.
Well, it's really hard to leave because we have only 4 wheelchairs and we have a lot of crutches that some other organization generously donated. But before we even got the 3rd wheelchair out, there were probably 10 more people lined up waiting for wheelchairs. And the thing that I realized was the saddest is that the ones that were the quickest to get out were probably the ones that didn't need the wheelchairs the most. Because the longer we stayed there, we saw more and more people coming out of the tents. They didn't have the mobility that the first group had. And it just took longer. And it was like we should have waited probably and given the wheelchairs to the ones that got there last as opposed to the ones that got there first. And we just have to go back. We've got to get another 500 wheelchairs.
It takes so little to make a difference in another's life. The Free Wheelchair Mission is a non-profit humanitarian ministry committed to providing wheelchairs to the poor in developing countries. But more importantly, we're a group of individuals who all share a common compassion, which is to serve others in the name of Jesus Christ. Thank you for your time, and thank you for your support.
I feel like I'm unveiling Frankenstein. This is the wheelchair. If I told people at first that I have a wheelchair that I can deliver to a developing country for $41.17, their minds is thinking, this must be pretty cheap. Can't pay possibly for $41, you're not going to get very much. The quality's got to be limited, and then I have to answer all these questions about durability and longevity. If I show somebody a wheelchair and then I say, oh, by the way, it costs $41.17 to manufacture and deliver, then it's like, wow, how do you do that for this much? And you don't have these questions. So that's kind of why we wanted to do this presentation. Let me tell you a little bit about how I got where I did. Professor Kiesner talked about Morocco. Even before that, I was born not comfortable asking anybody for help. I could be in a room when everybody had a watch and I didn't know what time it is. I'd try to figure it out somehow. I wouldn't ask. I'm just not very comfortable asking people for help. And I was brought up in a fairly technical family and trained to answer my own questions. So I gave God the credit for creating the universe, but I just felt that if there were questions that had to be answered, I would have to answer them for me. I couldn't rely on God to intervene. Went to school, wanted to become an engineer, in fact with a passion. Got out of MIT at the age of 29, got the job, bought the house. My wife and I go to Morocco for a vacation. And we've been to Morocco. It's a pretty poor country, a lot of beggars in Morocco. It hasn't changed. This was back in '79. And in the midst of street lined with beggars, this poor woman tries to get herself across the road with fingernails. Her other arm was lame and her legs were just dragging behind her. And she couldn't even bring herself to beg. And the beggars, in fact, were upset at her because we were watching her rather than the beggars. And she couldn't elevate herself to the stature in life where she had even the power to beg. She just wanted to get out of the way before the next cart came so she wouldn't get run over. And you wanted to reach down and help her, but then again, this is Morocco, this is an Arab country, and how do I do this? And so you just turn your back. And every 4 or 5 months, something would remind me of that woman, and I didn't know what was going on. Meanwhile, I'm chasing this idea. So if I can't ask anybody for help, I want to do something worthwhile in my life, I'm going to have to earn the money first. So I want to be a billionaire. That's clear. So I spent 25 years trying to become wealthy. I'm an inventor. I'm fairly creative. I've got 50 patents, and I've come up with some pretty interesting things for blood processing, for diagnostics, for biometrics. But when I think back at it, it really doesn't change things too much. I mean, because without the inventions I had, you can still do blood processing. So you still can diagnose for cancer, and you can still identify people's fingerprints. So what was the sense of the whole thing? And as you get older, you know, your life, your attitudes about what's going on changes, and you raise a family, you realize your kids, you can't answer their questions, and things change, and pretty soon I started to realize who was really answering questions. It wasn't me. It was God. Okay, well, having come to that understanding, what can an engineer do to help God? I mean, I can't preach, I can't evangelize, I can't sing, I can't play in a choir, I can't write a book, but I'm an engineer. So this idea of this wheelchair came back. What can I do about wheelchairs? Well, let's find out what is there to be done about wheelchairs first. In the movie, you saw the figure, 100 million people. It's actually a fact that's not very well worked out, because in most countries, people that are handicapped are hidden in the back room someplace. In many countries, they're a curse to their family. In many countries, it's an indication that the family has done something terrible and upset the gods, and this boy or this girl was born with a physical disability to make them pay for their sin. There's all these different reasons for keeping that handicapped person in the back room. So governments don't know how many people are handicapped in their countries. In the United States, it's about 2% of our population, but we have a lot of nursing homes. Other countries don't have nursing homes, but we don't have landmines, we don't have accidents, we don't have mutilations. In some countries in Africa, you vote for the wrong party, you get a leg cut off. We don't have home delivery of babies. We don't have polio, we don't have diseases, we don't have meningitis, we don't have all these things that causes this disability. So the best estimate is really pretty crude, 100 million, 130 million. The fact is that I've been in countries with mayors who didn't realize that 200 yards from their office is a handicapped person hung up in a shed behind a house. And it's just amazing how invisible these people have become, and how unproductive a part of society they have become. So I get to this knowledge of the need for wheelchairs, and I look into what's the solution. Well, the U.S. wheelchairs started about $300, and they worked their way up. There's a $20,000 model that you can use to go up and down stairs. And our governments will actually pay for these things. And people think wheelchairs, they think of those wheelchairs, and they say, well, 100 million times $300 or $400 or more, you can't solve it, so let's not even worry about it. So that's pretty much what has happened. The big humanitarian organizations in the world, World Vision, World Relief, Campus Crusade, they don't do anything with handicapped people because they don't have anything to offer them. Well, now the engineering, once I've worked that out, it's simple for an engineer. Wheelchair, I mean, you've got the ingredients right there. You don't have to go any further. Wheelchair. So, what are the cheapest wheels in the world? Well, you go to Toys R Us, you see bicycles for $30, $40. You do the math, and there's two wheels there, and there's a frame, and there's all this other stuff. Well, how much are the wheels? They can't be more than $3 or $4 each. And you look at the tag, made in China. And next to the Toys R Us, there's Home Depot. Where's the cheapest chair in the world? In the fall, Home Depot sells these plastic lawn chairs for about $3. They're trying to clear out their inventory. So for $6, $9, you've got wheels and a chair. And what else? You need a frame. You need something to connect them together. You need a footrest. You need brakes. Not because anybody really wants brakes, but because the people who think they know a lot about what the people need say you got to have brakes. People use brakes for a day or two, and then they realize they don't need them anymore. But we put them on because we had to satisfy those people who asked those questions in the government. And we had some price escalation. The goal was $25. I wanted to make a wheelchair for $25. It started at about $25, but then we added the footrest and we added the brakes. We have a harness here for children. The request was to have 3 different sizes of wheelchairs. We have 5 in the States. There were actually more for children, for small adults, for large adults. And the companies that make this, they also make car seats. So they said, why don't we just make a car seat? And as the child grows, you just let the car seat out. And the car seat costs $2, so you don't have to have 3 different sizes of wheelchairs. You can just have a car seat, a strap, which is just an accessory. So I knew I had to perfect this idea. I made the first one from Home Depot and Toys R Us. And conduit, which is what you use when you're wiring a house. It's not very strong, but you can bend it with limited amount of tools. I made the first one, and I sat in the garage for months. You know, I'm starting to say, what am I going to do with this idea? You know, I'm an engineer. I'm supposed to be out inventing things, and people are looking for me to be at work. My wife says, listen, either fish or cut bait here. I mean, you've been out in the garage at 5 o'clock in the morning for the last 2.5 years working on this design. You better come up with something or get on with something else. So in my meek self, I didn't want to actually call the pastor of our church, but I thought I'd get up enough nerve to write him an email. And he's the pastor of Global Outreach. And I emailed him and said, Pastor Skip, I've got this idea about giving away wheelchairs to the poorest of the poor, and I wonder if you could help me kind of walk this through. And he said, sure, come on over. I'd like to meet you, bring the wheelchair. And with a lot of intimidation, I went to meet this Pastor Skip. And this Mariners Church down in Orange County, it's a fairly big church. He loved the wheelchair. He says, I want to go for a ride. So I had to push him around the parking lot. And you know, it's funny, meanwhile, 3 or 4 people walked by, and they said, and they looked at the wheelchair, and they said, wouldn't that be a good wheelchair for developing countries? And it's almost like he asked them to do that, because, and it was because they had been on missions before, and they had kind of seen people that we described about crawling across the road. So Skip says, you know, I'm not a businessman, and I don't know how to start an organization, but you've got to look into some, you know, key things. What do other organizations do? And how do they protect themselves, and how do they grow? So I started to interview the other organizations in our country that do wheelchairs. There's one up in North LA, not far from here actually, Wheels for Humanity. They get used wheelchairs. They have retired Boeing engineers come in on Saturdays, and they take from a warehouse of 10,000 square feet bearings and other parts to renovate these used wheelchairs, and then when they get 200 together, they strip them off. They do a fantastic job. They've been doing it for 10 years, thousands and thousands of volunteer man hours. Other organizations have new wheelchairs, but they're paying a high price for it. So I'm more and more encouraged by this concept. And I decided, well, if this is going to work, I've got to test it. I've been through a lot of testing in my career, trying to get things through FDA, and so it's sort of like a clinical trial. So I make 100 of these wheelchairs in my garage. They're very expensive, but I just, you know, wanted to get them out in the field. I wanted to take all 100 at one time, take my vacation, go on a mission, give them out, see what happened. The church that I went to had a medical mission going to Chennai, India. It was hard for me to convince people what I really wanted to do. It was like, well, there's got to be a catch here. You want to give away millions of wheelchairs, and you're going to get people to donate to do this, and how's this going to work? I mean, you're probably planning some kind of a clinical trial, or you're going to wind up getting us addicted to these chairs, and then you're going to start selling them for $200. All these things are going on. I'm fighting this uphill battle because it just doesn't make any sense. Somebody who's from this business, engineering, design world wanting to give money away. Basically what I wanted to do was give money away. And I told him, well, I wasn't very good at making it, but I bet I could give it away really well. So we got to Chennai, but we could only take 4 wheelchairs on the plane. And the first wheelchair, even the people in India, Chennai, India, were skeptical. Oh, the people won't know how to make it work. Somebody will steal it, it'll get stuck in their ruts, it'll fall apart, they won't be able to get it through the doorways. Basically, people are okay without the wheelchairs because they had grown up developing a calloused heart to the handicapped, physically disabled, because they never had anything to give them. So we go to the first mission. It was an outpost where it was a medical team, a couple doctors, a couple nurses. There's no place for any patients to sit down, and the first patient comes in, he's being carried by his father. He's 11-year-old, Emmanuel is his name, and I pushed the wheelchair out from behind, because that's where they wanted me to keep it, so that just to see what would happen. And I thought maybe Emmanuel's father would sit in the wheelchair. But it turned out his father put Emmanuel in the wheelchair, and he's just pushing him around this cement sort of driveway, waiting for the doctor. And you can just see the mission people's the lights are going on. It's, you know, it looks like it might be working. So they decide, well, let's go investigate where this family lives. Because if the doorway is too narrow, or if it's upstairs, or whatever, if it's on a mountain, they're not going to be able to use this wheelchair. So I'm with a Christian mission team, and this is Hindu territory in India. So we asked the family to get in this big old white truck that says, Jesus loves you on the side of it. You can tell what they're thinking. Strangers, white guys, cameras, you know, and they're going to take us someplace. So we drive them back to it's about 3 miles. They walked with Emmanuel to see the doctor. And we drive him back, and he lives in this little agricultural village, much like I described to you in the beginning. He made $2, he gave $1 back. Emmanuel had polio. And it's sure enough, the doorway's fine, and they're on the ground floor, and we went inside, and we saw Emmanuel's bed. It was a little, where a dog would probably sleep normally. It's like a little square, about a yard by a yard, had a couple old blankets in it, and that's where he spent most of his life. And everything was fine. It was perfect. And meanwhile, there's this group of the neighbors are starting to congregate around this. There's this van, and there's this wheelchair, and people are coming with crutches. In fact, there's other people in this village that had polio. So the people I'm with are getting a little nervous. This is a Hindu village. We've got Christianity written all over the bus and everything. What'll happen? So they said to the man who was the mission leader, now's your chance to really tell them why we're here. So open your book, tell them about the Samaritan, which is the purpose of why we're here. And then once that happened, the mission people really saw the value of the share, opened doors for them. It allowed them to do a job. It allowed them to get into a village they never would have gotten into before. We're all in tears. I mean, it was just an amazing day. The next day, then I get all the Americans with me, and we go out to Lotus Blossom's house. Lotus Blossom lives down by a polluted river. There's actually animals floating belly up down this river. It's kind of green water, and it really stinks. And there's kids playing in it, and there's cows drinking it. And they have this it's a slum. It's made out of thatch. And the thatch goes all but to about a foot from the ground, because when it rains in the monsoons, they don't want to have any walls because it'll take the walls right out. So you can get some light in from the perimeter. And of course, any animal that happens to be in an area can go right into your home. Dirt floor, little cutout for the wall for the door. And we go inside, and there's Lotus Blossom. That's the English translation of her name. And she was on a mat, and we thought she was about 17. And they knew we were coming, so she was well dressed. She had a nice clean outfit on, but she was laying on her stomach. And she just kind of looks up, and she looks at us through one eye, because she's kind of hard on her neck to bend up, to look at both eyes. And she's got this beautiful smile, but she's just pretty much stuck on this mat. And the orthopedic surgeon who was with me from our mission trip examined her and said he thought she had cerebral palsy, which is home birth, delivery, interruption of blood flow through the umbilical cord, and it leads to neural damage. But she had some tactile sense in her legs and her arms, and he thought she would be a great candidate for the wheelchair. So he picks her up and he puts her in a wheelchair, and suddenly, in this dark hut, this radiant smile from Lotus Blossom was just so intense. I mean, it went from ear to ear. And just this warmth starts to spread first to her mother and then to her family members and her father. And her mother immediately gets the wheelchair and starts maneuvering it back and forth. And Lotus Blossom has one arm that she can use, and she's over there trying to move one tire a little bit and then another tire a little bit so she can kind of go in a straight line. And the neighborhood kids all come out and start moving the rocks from in front of the village into her home, her slum, so she can come outside. And we take her for a waltz outside, and she says, I've got to, this is too much for me, too much of a rush. You've got to take me back. I can't take the emotion of this event. And so we had to actually bring her back and ease her into this new life for her. We managed to keep track of Lotus Blossom. This was 3 years ago, and the chair is doing well. But about 2 months ago, a volunteer went over with a camera, and I asked him, while you were there, would you mind checking in on Lotus Blossom? And I had this on video, but her mother pushes Lotus Blossom out on the wheelchair, and they stop, and all of a sudden Lotus Blossom gets up. And she starts walking, and she's pointing at her feet. And what happened was the hope that the wheelchair gave her to change her life was enough to motivate her to try to learn how to walk. And she used the wheelchair as a walker, grabbing behind it and doing one step at a time and probably falling down. And over a 3-year period, now she's got regained the muscular control in her legs so she can walk. She still has kind of a limp, and she gets tired. She can go about 300 meters. But now her dream is to give the wheelchair away to someone who really needs it. She doesn't need it anymore. So these are the kind of things that allowed me to think that I was on the right track. So this trip to Chennai, India was about a 3-week trip. And then I was working then for a biometrics company. And they said, on the way back, stop at Shanghai because we want to get production of this fingerprint reader up from 5,000 a month to 50,000 a month. So I stopped there and do my engineering thing. And I get back home and I find out the next day the company went bankrupt and you're out of a job. And so now the choice comes, well, what do I do next? Do I put my resume together? Do I start looking for a job? Probably have to relocate someone where I am in my career. There's not like jobs right down the street. And then I just realized that was kind of a God's 2x4. He didn't want me to work. He wanted me to do the free wheelchair mission. So after being home for about 3 months, my wife said, we've got to do something because we don't have any insurance, we don't have anything. So she goes back to work. And she's been working ever since. So in fact, she's probably given much more up of her life than I have to do this. We come back with stories like that and we start to ask people if they wanted to help. I put together a board of directors, mainly friends, businessmen, someone who was a finance guy, medical doctor, people from our church. And it's really kind of a functional board, a lot of volunteer time. The first year we gave away 100 wheelchairs, and next year 5,000. Last year we gave away 25,000, and this year we want to give away 75,000. And after a series of strategic planning meetings, we've come up with this goal of giving away 20 million this decade. Thinking if there's really 100 million people plus, and they're on the ground and they're tired of waiting to be being on the ground, and we ought to really try to do something about it. I mean, it's a totally preposterous growth plan. People told me that the first year, but we did grow by a factor of 3. People told me about it the second year, and we grew by more than a factor of 3. And this year, that's why I want to go from 25 to 75. Next year, 225. Next year, 600 to 75. And the last year, I think we're planning on giving away 7 million wheelchairs, which, again, I realize now this is not me doing this. It's a lot of people that are involved, and I mean, this is God working behind us. It's a faith-based mission. The wheelchair gives great tangible results immediately, and a lot of donors, because this is a donation-based situation, all they see is the wheelchair, and that's fine if that's where they're coming from. But there's a spiritual side behind it as well, because and there's almost, in addition to the spiritual side, there's a practical side of how we do these things. We know that we got to find honorable, honest people to distribute these wheelchairs, and we're talking about lots of wheelchairs. It's not just giving away 2 or 3, and we don't want them sold. And who's going to be the best to do that? Traditionally, everybody tells me it's the Christian mission field that's going to be the best to do this. They're going to do the best, the most honest job, the most sincere job of distributing wheelchairs. So all we really want to do is offer wheelchairs to people. We don't want to distribute them. Now, we've had to do some distribution because we had to prove to the world that this is a reasonable concept. But we want to offer wheelchairs to mission people as a tool, open doors. You'd be surprised the doors that this opens. You go into a village and you say, where's the poorest of the poor? And somebody will come hungry or needing clothes. You go, no, that's not the poorest of the poor. I want to see the poorest of the poor. Oh, they can't get here? Well, that's probably the poorest of the poor. Those are the handicapped people in that village. Those are the ones that are stuck in the back. So I'll bring them, we're going to bring this wheelchair to them, and all of a sudden that catches people's attention and opens doors for mission work. And it's just been an incredible tool for them, and we want to help them. So we're, in a way, like a Bible printer. We're offering them a tool to do their work. It's not a Bible, but it's an actual physical example of the Good Samaritan, what Jesus told us to do. But providing wheelchairs and letting people help get around. It's not helping them walk, but it's helping them get around. So the wheelchairs are made in China. You've got 2 factories. I took the prototype, having given out 100. It seemed to work, hold up, seemed to provide mobility. They didn't get stuck in the ruts. People knew how to use them immediately. There's no training involved. And we think we have to train everybody in our society. When you buy a wheelchair, you get training. But it really doesn't take a lot of training. And if it doesn't fit, I mean, they don't need adjustments. We'll want to have all kinds of adjustments. Well, if the person's too small, they get a blanket and stuff it in. If the person's falling out, before we had to strap, they tie some rope around. If the people's feet don't stay in place, they'll strap them on. Before I didn't have a brake, they just put a stick through the spokes if it needed a brake. I mean, people are amazingly versatile, and they wouldn't be alive if they weren't, because you realize these people are living on stuff that they find primarily. So the design worked, and I knew I had to go to Asia. Found one factory through connections at the church that I go to. Send them the design, and 3 days later they sent me a photocopy back. I mean, an email with a photo of their clone. It took about 6 months to iron out the differences. It's kind of interesting. These are American chairs built for our bodies. And there's some subtleties in the design of a wheelchair for center of gravity. I mean, you don't want it to tip forward, tip back, side to side. So they just got the chair in China. Well, the Chinese are smaller than we are. They have smaller bottoms, their chairs are slightly different. So they took the Chinese chair, put it on a frame, and you tip back, you just lean back and you tip back. And so we actually had to go out and find a manufacturer of Western style chair in China, which this one is. It's made by a company in New Zealand for export. But it took some time. So we have one company near Hong Kong, and now this wheelchair is made by a new company we're just starting to work with in Shanghai. They're shipped in containers, they're shipped as kits, 550 in a container. The reason why I ship them in kits is because they stack, the chair is stacked, the frame stacked, everything else is in a box. And I can get 550 in a container, whereas if they're assembled, you see how much air there is in this design, you can only get about 200 in the container. Yeah, it does put a little bit more work on the receiving party because they have to assemble them. But they seem to be very happy to do that. It takes about 20 minutes once you learn. The first one will probably take you a couple hours to work through, but we have directions that are just photographs, no words. Even if you did translate it, they probably don't know how to read, the volunteers. So we probably have 1,500 volunteers around the world now. We've got wheelchairs in over 40 countries. They ship right from China to the country, the target. We don't want to bring them back here, although we do bring containers back for demonstration purposes. And there's a lot of missions want to just go to Mexico and take chairs or wherever. We've got the U.S. Navy actually helping us bring wheelchairs into Mexico. It was difficult for us to bring them in. We've got wheelchairs into 3 containers into Iraq, 4 containers into Iraq. The Marines gave them away in the Spanish Army. We've got them into Sierra Leone. We got them in Liberia. We've got some going into Sudan. It's on the way to Sudan. These are some pretty tough areas. But as long as we can find a mission group that's solid and that they agree to our very brief requirements, they go to the poorest of the poor. They can't, in other words, if they can afford a wheelchair, then you don't give them one. They have to not have a wheelchair. They can't have one hidden in the back room someplace. They have to need a wheelchair, and then they have to have some support, whether it be family or relatives or friends or wherever, so that they're just not totally on their own. Because we feel they're going to need support just to keep the wheelchair, and to get into the wheelchair and get out of the wheelchair. And then we'll ship these 550 wheelchairs in a container. It takes about 3 months. Container's $22,600, including shipping. And they'll get through port somehow. They'll get through the duties and customs, and they'll get into the countries. Get broken up into probably groups of 50 or 75 or 100 or whatever. We send 50 toolkits, lots of copies of the instructions. Everybody gets an air pump and a patch kit in case you're out in the jungle and you don't have a gas station to replace the flat. That's really the only thing that we've found so far that is needs service, is the air. You know, you'll need to replace the air because it just comes out. And if you do get a puncture, you can patch it. And the stories are just amazing. And the things that happen when you give a wheelchair. Everybody we give a wheelchair to has a story. A lot of times it's very difficult because these people tend not to be very well educated. Probably have never even gotten a chance to go to school. But every now and then we can go out on a mission and we can actually do a little bit of questions and answers. And the kind of things you hear are just amazing. We gave a wheelchair away in India to a boy. About 4 months later, we went back to see him. And he said, you know, I never had any ambitions in life. My plan was to be a fruits vendor because he used to go to school and push his books in front of him on the dirt and then take a sort of a stride with his hands and then push his books again. And by the time he got to school, his books were filthy and he was filthy. And he said, nobody will hire a smart mind in dirty clothes. I mean, I have no future. There's no way I can ever get there from here. And now he wants to go to computers. He wants to be a computer scientist because he's upright. He gets his school clean, and he can put his books on his lap. We've had stories where mothers will actually carry their kids 3 or 4 miles to school. You know, every 100 feet, put the kid down and take a rest. Pick the kid up, take another 100 feet. You know, it takes about an hour to get to school, 2 hours. And then come back at night. And then friends have to help the kid go to the bathroom or go up and down the stairs. So the impact that the wheelchair has not just on the individual but the family members. In Fiji, we had a story of a pot of boiling water tipped over on this 3-year-old and devastated her. But the family this is a family of love. They're not gonna bail on this invalid. So the mother and father, full-time job taking care of this girl. She's now 23 years old, and her two older sisters, they're not allowed to get married. They have to work to support the family. You can see how that one person's handicap, the disabilities affected 4 people. We gave a wheelchair away. There was there were 2 brothers, David and Joseph. David was the older, and he was handicapped, and Joseph was about 10 years younger. And David is all smiling because he's in a wheelchair. Joseph is completely in tears. And we asked what's going on, and it turns out that Joseph, when he was 13, his parents made him drop out of school, and he was David's wheelchair. And he'd been carrying David for the last 12 or 14 years. He had no life of his own because whenever David had to go someplace, that's what he did. So David was happy, but Joseph was even happier because he could actually push his brother home in a wheelchair. And I could go on for hours with these stories, but I'd like to pause now to see if you have any questions. Yes?
Well, first of all, I want to tell you it's an amazing story you got, and I wish that's the kind of stuff we heard about in the news instead of other things. But I want to ask you, it seems like you almost did something too good, and at some point, some wheelchair company must have said, hey, what the hell are you doing? Did you ever have that, or what kind of scenarios did you run into where somebody said, no, this is too good to be true, this is too good to be true? I don't know.
Well, we've got some resistance from professional physical therapists. Because again, in the United States, there's a lot of physical therapy going on in the wheelchair. And they've actually attacked me on occasion because they say, well, you have a lot of nurses to be giving wheelchairs away. Because, what about ulcers? What about sores under your legs? What about infections? And I say, well, all what you say is true, but they haven't seen what I've seen. What about the sores and the infections that you get when you're living on the ground?
Yeah.
And you're liable to die of a urinary tract infection if you're living on the ground. And you might get a sore on your leg, and that could kill you too if you're not careful. But that's been the major assault on this idea. Second to that is a lot of people will say, I want to sell your wheelchair. I want to take the design and sell it. I said, well, I purposely did not patent this because I want people to copy it. And if they want to sell it, more power to them. Because it's what it's going to do is lower the price of wheelchairs for the world, which is not a bad thing. But if they want to give them away, they can give them away cheaper than I can, all the better too. I'm here to spend money. I'm not here to make money. So.
Very commendable.
Yes?
What's the phone number in case I want to donate something from that?
Pardon?
What's a good phone to contact?
Oh,
maybe
well, there's
donate at least $20 a month.
It's good for you. There's a literature on the table there. There's a PR kit, which is fairly detailed, and then there's a little trifold, and there's a little card. Anyway, help yourself. I came here for a reason. Well, actually, a lot of reasons, but one of the reasons is the network. Because sometimes people hear my story and they say, well, I don't have any money, I don't know anything about wheelchairs, and I don't have any talent, so I can't help you. But the fact is that you probably all have a lot of talent, or you wouldn't be in school. You probably all know a lot of people, and someday you probably all have a lot of money if you're in business school too. We all hope. Better. So I mean, it's the network, it's the people that you talk to, because that's how we find our growth is by network, by word of mouth. And so I'm just hoping that out of this, you'll take the literature, take the story, and share it with the people you know. And you never know. You might have a neighbor who's in a Rotary Club. The Rotary's been a big benefactor of us. You might have somebody who's good do design work, who can help us on some of our PR work. You might have somebody who's in the radio business or broadcasting business, or somebody who your parents, a friend of your parents. I mean, God works in very mysterious ways, as they say, and I would be amazed if we didn't get some wonderful networks out of this audience. Yes?
Well, sir, just wanted to say it's a beautiful design. I mean, it's a $3 plastic chair, $6 for the wheels, and of course they're mountain bikes, so it makes it perfect to, in unpaved roads. It's a beautiful design, but I'm just curious, how long does it actually last? I mean, because in third world countries, I'm pretty sure because there are no roads and because of weather conditions and whatnot, it might tend to not last as long. So I'm just wondering, how long does it last, and do you have future plans to actually improve upon the design?
Yes. Well, the only evidence I have that's really strong is that we've had them out now for 3.5 years. That was the first ones we gave out. Now, people single out this white chair and they'll say that's probably the weak point because we all have experiences in our backyard. Leave these out in the sun for 4 or 5 years and they'll crack on you. There's a couple things I have in defense. One is this is built for the equator. I mean, it's built in China for the equator, so we've loaded as much UV stabilizer in as we could. We're using only virgin plastic, so that it's white, so you can tell there's no regrind. I mean, that's a technical point, but it being if you use reground plastic, it weakens the plastic. So, but the reality is that people take care of these chairs better than I take care of the ones in my backyard. I mean, this is their livelihood. It's sad to say that many times it's the best thing that will happen to these people in their lives, and they know it. So they're going to take care of this. It's their home. Some people live in these chairs. They sleep in it. They eat in it. Their days are in it. And if it's going to be outside in the sun, they'll be in the sun with it. Or if it's going to be in the rain, they'll be on top of it. So I think it's a little hard to tell. I would hope that they last at least 10 years. And that would be a great goal. You know, the life expectancy of handicapped people, the physically disabled people in developing countries isn't 50 years like it is in the States. So it's a race against time, but if we can improve their lives for 10 years, it'd be an accomplishment, I feel.
Let's do one more question.
How have you financed your chairs? And your plan over the next decade is to sell, I think, 7 million chairs. How do you plan to finance that? Is it personal donation, corporate financing? How are you planning to achieve that?
Yeah, it's 20 million this decade, not 10. I wish it was only 7, but it's 20. And it's been all through donations. We're starting to, you know, this is kind of a grassroots. I'm an engineer, don't know anything about the nonprofit development world. We've got a compelling story. Everybody tells me that. We got our start with individual donors. We're now starting to go after foundations. We're probably going to launch a mass mailing this year before the end of the year because of the appeal. You know, you get these things in the mail, give me $25 to support a family. $40 change a life forever. It's a little bit more powerful of an appeal. And so we think we may do well at getting out nationally with a mass mailing. After 3 or 4 years of stable existence, we can go after the bigger foundations like the Gates Foundation or the Hilton Foundation is a good example. It's going to be tough. I mean, we really don't know where the funds are going to come from. But that's our plan, to get it from donations. Yes?
Last one.
I just wanted to kind of congratulate you on such an extraordinary achievement. And my question was, why Shanghai the factory?
Oh, it's a wheelchair factory. They approached us. When I started, I couldn't get in a fight with anybody to manufacture this. They didn't want anything to do with it. And I was lucky to get the one going in Hong Kong that we found. But since then, I've had a number of companies wanting to make it for us. Because, I mean, pretty soon we'll be giving more wheelchairs away than anybody's ever sold. And, you know, if they make $1 or $2 per wheelchair, which they are our profit-making company, that'll be a great business for them.
Because I'm under the impression that the southern part of mainland China is much cheaper.
Yeah.
Especially the land and the factories and everything.
Well, that's a good point. I don't know China very well. I should probably look around. We want to get manufacturing in South America and Africa and in the Middle East as well. So we don't have to rely on just one country.
Okay, I'm going to stop you now, and he'll probably be here for a few minutes afterwards. Sure. Before you guys give one hell of a hand to this guy, every one of you in the eye, you remember this guy. Because every one of you is going to be filthy rich. But that doesn't matter. It doesn't matter a bit how much you make. What matters is what you do with the brains you've got, the power you've got, the ability you've got, and the success you have in life to help the world. Look at what this guy's done, the brains he had and how he used it to help people. Every one of you better do that. Give him a hand.